We're live.
Oh, yes. Yep. We're good.
Great. Woo! For your patience, I had this event set up. We've had no problems. Started using it, and I went to go think it was a server error. Legit. And as Allie was saying, Mercury retrograde, full moon, weird crud happens. So Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your patience. I think you missed us talking about squirrels. So
yes, you made your background noise coming from me. There is a squirrel up in my attic. Not specters. So
you could have played it off as that, Allie. Come on, it's
I was a squirrel this year for Halloween at my job, so I probably could have gone up there dressed as a squirrel and maybe tried to
You could have. People's.
If you're joining us now, this is the pre-show hangout where Stacy and I just talk about whatever is on our mind, tell you a little bit about what's upcoming with Green Bank. Stacy makes really cool cocktails, and the show officially starts at 7. So this is a perfect time for us to work out any tech issues or anything else.
Yeah. Though I really like that 30 minutes of hanging out with everybody at a time.
Yes.
But that's okay. That's what cocktails are for.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of which, do you want to make one?
I mean, you know what? Yes, because after that tech problem.
Yeah.
So tonight's cocktails, they're Halloween themed. I've been kind of looking forward to this for a while. Haven't had this drink since I was last at the Speakeasy Hummingbird to Mars.
Oh, good choice.
Yeah. So this is Corpse Survivor number 2. This one's adapted from the 1930s recipe from the Savoy Cocktail book, which took its inspiration from the Jerry Thomas cocktail book, which if you don't have it, it is a fun, delightful read. There's a lot of weird cocktails in there, a lot of weird ingredients. And so if you're wanting something that, if you're not into trying to dissect the receipts as they were called back then, go for the Savoy Cocktail book. I checked it out. It's much more modern as the 30s can be, I guess. But 1960s versus 1930.
It's a big difference.
It's a big difference because you're not talking about a loaf of sugar. You're talking about, hey, this much sugar, half an ounce or whatever. So, and the reason, one of the things that was said about this cocktail from Harry Craddock was that 4 of these taken in swift succession would unrevive the corpse again. So, drinker's discretion is advised.
I feel like I needed that this morning.
I know, me too.
Tough getting up.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't. So I had espresso at 4 o'clock. So this is gonna be a fun night.
Oh, you're gonna make 10 cocktails.
Just might, Allie. This one always gets sticky, so I'm not gonna use this one.
I'm waiting for one time that thing breaks in there.
That's why I use my finger. So those of you that have not seen me make a cocktail before, it is recommended to use saline if you're wanting to dilute it a little bit more. I'm using ice that's been sitting here, so it's already got a little bit of water to it. So I'm not gonna do saline by itself. I'm just going to I'm not gonna do saline. I'm gonna use salt by itself. So cocktail salt is a thing. It enhances the flavor. I'm not weird. I promise I'm not weird. I'm looking up the secondary recipe today. I did notice that some of them were like, hey, you can add salt. And some activated charcoal and squid ink. So my salt seems really normal. So if you guys wanted to comment to tell us what you're drinking tonight, how you're celebrating Mischief Night, what you're doing for Halloween, whether you're staying in or, staying in seems to be one of the only options these days, but. All right, so this one has a lot of alcohol in it, as I'm sure you can tell by the name. So it starts with a gin base. Just give me 1 second here. So we are using Painted Stave again. Not only because it's local and we like supporting our local businesses.
Yes.
But it's a really delicious gin. For those of you that are not super fans of juniper,
this person right here.
It's got a really nice citrus flavor. It's not too intense, which is good. It's just really delicious and really lends itself to a lot of cocktails. Hi, sorry.
I would just blame it on the ghost. Messing with this
stuff. What's spilled all over? Like, oh, lemon juice. Okay. Cool. So 1 ounce of gin, and then you would use an ounce of triple sec.
Apparently, the squirrel is not eradicated yet from my attic. I keep hearing like specters upstairs.
It's too funny.
Waiting for it to just like drop out somewhere in this like where I'm sitting, and it just like starts running through the house.
Squirrel party. And then you would use an ounce of Lillet Blanc. There are a whole whack ton of different kinds of Lillets out there, but it's really neat. And you can, I think in Italy, France, they drink it on the rocks. It's nice and citrusy, very spritzy. It is delicious with just a little bit of sparkling water.
Ooh.
They originally used Lillet Quina in this recipe, but that version of Lillet is no more. I won't lie, I looked it up at one point, but the story wasn't interesting enough as to why it faded out of existence for me to remember. So, sorry, Lillet, this is delicious. And so, the Rosé one. 10 out of 10 recommend these. And you'll find them in a lot of classic cocktails that call for that. Or like if you wanted to be James Bond for Halloween, you want your Vesper Martini, you're going to need this bad boy.
You know, that's not a bad idea. Pick someone for Halloween that has a great cocktail associated with them.
I mean, yeah, that's what I do. What do you do? How do you choose your costume? All right, so then you take an ounce of lemon juice. Fun fact, if you don't have citrus or acid, you should never shake your cocktail. So, hate to say James Bond does it wrong. I mean, everything's to your taste, but...
I'm like replaying back all the cocktails I made.
Oh, me too. When I read that, I was like, oh, I'm a noob. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to take around 10 seconds or so. And I used this last week, I think. Last week, the week before. Last week's beer cocktails. This is an atomizer, aromatizer. Can't remember the word of it. It's a spritzer.
Oh, hey.
You know, like the Christmas cracker things, like the popper things. So you want to spritz your glass with, they call for absinthe. I've got Pernod. Same thing. Anise all up in the air over here.
It's like perfume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who needs perfume? You just spritz yourself down with a little gin. It's fine. Just don't drive. Yep. All right. So then you strain that bad boy. The whole reason that stuff went cray. So then you would take...
Huh?
I try to peel it over top of the cocktail because whatever essential oils are being released will get at least a little bit more into the cocktail.
Oh, that's smart.
And then you twist.
Ta-da!
So that is that cocktail.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That looks beautiful.
You know what? My wife's not knowing right now. Yeah. I'm going to have one.
Very cool.
And then the second cocktail that we're doing, I'm actually going to pour it off my used ice. Same thing. Salting the cocktail. While I'm doing this, guys, please let me know what you're drinking. I mean, it is Friday, so happy Friday.
Yeah. Yeah, let us know what your other Halloween plans are. We're glad you're spending part of your sort of Halloween weekend with us.
Makes me feel special.
Yeah.
I'm not really sarcastic. I know the tone came across sarcastic and I'm not. All right. So this one, I try to do 2 different cocktails. And for those of you tequila drinkers, I am so sorry. I saw so many good cocktails for this today that had mezcal, and I regret that I don't have any. I tried to find ways that I could have faked it, but I feel like this was with mezcal because the artistry that's involved with that particular liquor is involved.
Yeah.
So gonna use. I am not this yet. I'm using Rittenhouse Rye. Again, local. It's not as local. Well, you know what? No, 45 minutes either way, right? This is Philly.
That's a solid choice.
Yeah. This is one of my favorites. It's my go-to for mixed cocktails because it has a nice spice to it. It's not necessarily one that I'm going to sip, especially at 100 proof, but it gives me, it's just delicious. So this one starts off with 2 ounces of this bad boy. I'm going to need more. My wife put me on a no booze ban, your no booze purchasing ban until December. Well, I think she was trying to do the end of the year, but I whittled her down to December or to the beginning of December. I don't know if this is going to last me, Allie.
I don't think so. You have to go to other kinds of alcohol.
She's in the other room and can hear everything I'm saying, so it's not like I'm, all right, so then, again, triple sec. So those 2 ounces of rye. You could use bourbon if you prefer. I like rye because it gives a nice little spice. And this cocktail, I should say, is called the Smashing Pumpkin. We're going to do an ounce of this. It calls for Grand Marnier. I mean, there is a special, Grand Marnier is made a special way, but for all of this, I'm just going to do that. And then half an ounce of lemon juice. Actually, that's an ounce right there. Cool beans. And then you want a full ounce, of ginger liqueur. So I have GE Massanier, and it's really delicious. The brand that most people will be familiar with would be Domaine Canton. It has a really cool bottle.
Ginger liqueur sounds really interesting.
It's so good. I made a dark and stormy martini with this and rum. So now it's
folks, we are 5 minutes until showtime. Stacy is finishing up her second from bespoke cocktail themed for tonight. So let us know if you're excited. If you want to try one of her drinks, what you're drinking, and we'll get started in just a few minutes here.
And then, because it is called the Smashing Pumpkin, I have 2 ounces of pumpkin puree here.
Ooh, well, that's delightful.
Yeah, it's going to be smushy. That's fun.
That's a really neat recipe. I like that.
Yeah. I was debating between that and a pumpkin flip recipe, but I already have one.
Oh, don't tell me that. That sounds awesome.
It's going to happen. I'm totally excited to do it for Christmas or, next. So then, again, you just shake for 10 seconds.
Yep.
Sure.
Looks like pumpkin.
Looks like pumpkin. It looks bright orange. And then strain it.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
And then you can garnish it if you want to with, allspice or nutmeg. They call to put a star anise pod in here. I'm not the biggest fan of anise, so I'm not doing that, but you guys can certainly do that if you want to. I'm not going to tell you how to drink your drink. Nope. If you're enjoying it, it's a good cocktail. that is my thing. Hey, wifey, do you want your drink? So actually, before we switch over to the our wonderful presenters, Ray, we want to tell you a nice little specialty. Is that last year we did a holiday Folklore Friday, and we made it members only because we just really wanted to thank our members. And don't get me wrong, we still want to thank our members, but this year we want to thank everybody because, and we just feel like this year has been really difficult for everybody. And we think that it, like, the holiday has this special feel to it where it just, once you get away from the hustle and bustle and all of that, there's just this warm feeling of togetherness. And we think that that's really important now more than ever when we really can't gather in person. So we're going to open this up to everybody. So we're going to be on December 11th. Our vice chair of the board is actually in several bands. And he let me talk him into playing some holiday music for us. So he's going to be playing a selection of Christmas songs. I gave him a whole list of Hanukkah songs as well, because Hanukkah does start on the 10th of December. And we very much want to embody that everybody's history is important. It's not just the majority, it's everybody, because you can't create a quilt without a plethora of threads. And the same thing as you can't create a country or its history without so many different people. So we're going to be doing that on December 11th at 7 p.m. And we'll be doing that from the Phillips farmhouse. We're going to have nice ambiance going on. We're going to light the fire in the hearth. Hopefully whatever critter has crawled into the Phillips farmhouse is gone. Manager today was messaging us first thing this morning saying, it's getting cold. The squirrels and all that want to come inside.
They do.
We're going to be posting information about that in the coming weeks. So we look forward to having you guys join us for that, because getting together and celebrating just the holidays and the spirit of care and giving is really important. So with that said, I would like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, our Folklore Friday enthuse, Raymond Harrington. He is part of the Almost Forgotten History of the Red Clay Valley. Sorry, my mouse is having issues because it's wet on the table.
Mine's off. Yeah. Hello.
Hello, Ray.
Hi, everybody.
So before we get started, there is viewer discretion advised. This is a Halloween episode. These are true stories. People may have died. There was some mayhem. There was some murder, maybe.
Murder, mayhem, probably a death in there too.
So your choice as to whether or not you let your kids watch. We just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because we don't want anyone to be surprised. So we're going to take a quick 30 seconds to get everything ready. You guys grab your drink, grab your Halloween candy that you've already taken from the kids. Right back. If I can get my mouse to work.
And real quick, before we get started too, Stacy and I are wearing some cool Folklore Friday swag. We have a shop, which we'll post a link to, with some really great merchandise. So if you really enjoyed the series this fall, we have koozies, all sorts of things. And you can also just donate. So we have a link right over other side.
I will put Allie put the link up in the chat, and I will there.
Yes. So please support us.
This week's item is a nice fleece blanket. They are super warm.
That would be perfect when we're back in person in front of a real fire in front of the Phillips house,
because it is cold outside. All right, so we will be back in 30 seconds, guys, with Ray.
Ray. Contains graphic and violent subject matter. that may not be suitable. Hello, everybody. I would like to thank everyone at the Greenbank Mill for inviting me back to a Folklore Friday. The first, I'm going to do 2 talks. The title of this is Murder and Mayhem in Marshallton. So for the All Hallows Eve, I decided to take 2 true accounts of some pretty crazy events that happened in beautiful downtown Marshallton. And the very first of these 2 is called The Shootout on the Old Capitol Trail. The sleepy little town of Marshallton, Delaware is the last place you would ever expect to find a shootout in broad daylight. However, on the afternoon of Saturday, February 5th, 1972, that all changed. During the 1950s, automobile enthusiasts in Delaware started to form several different car clubs. Each had their own club names, colors, and club jackets with emblems on them. There were also motorcycle enthusiasts who did the same thing. Now, originally, these clubs were a chance for like-minded people to go on long drives together. They could socialize, they could spend time with their family, and some of them formed racing teams. But by the end of the 1960s, most of them had been replaced with just a few groups that were labeled outlaw motorcycle groups by the FBI. The best way to explain the difference of these new groups from the old one can best be described by this Hunter S. Thompson quote. Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skin in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride." This was most embodied by a group called the Pagans. Now, they were the most visible motorcycle club in Delaware, as they were a nationwide group with local chapters. Now, the Pagans were originally formed by Lou Dobkins in 1959 in Prince George, Maryland. The club rapidly expanded, and by 1969, the Pagans' original clad in blue denim jackets quickly began to evolve into the lines of the stereotypical one-percenter motorcycle club. Now, one percenter is said to refer to a comment that 99% of motorcyclists were law-abiding citizens, implying the last 1% were not. Now, if you were interested in the motorcycle lifestyle in Delaware, that was the group to join. Once in the club, you would have the status and protection of the organization. Now, there were people in the area who were into the lifestyle, but didn't want to join the Pagans for whatever reasons. So they started their own groups with similar names and looks. Now, to the general public, it all looked the same. If you had a large motorcycle and a jacket with a club logo, you were a biker. So like the car clubs, each group would have their own insignia and colors to identify which group you were in. There were people who joined one group, but then switched to another. Sometimes a group would disband and you could be recruited to join another group. Many bikers joined several different clubs over the years. Now, it's been said that if you were a member of a small group and found yourself surrounded by members of the Pagans, they would demand you join their group or take off your colors. They call it taking your colors. That's when they go after another group's emblems. Members would physically rip off the emblems from the other jackets, the person's jackets, after you win a fight or if somebody surrenders it. The Delaware chapter of the Pagans started around 1967, and by 1972, they had about 50 members. They soon wanted all the other splinter groups who styled themselves as motorcycle club members to join the Pagans. Maybe due to territorial concerns, the desire to have safety in numbers, wanting to become the only group in the state, or merely to prevent copycats. Now, there were 3 other larger clubs in the area around that time: the Drifters, the Hangmen, and the Vulcans. By 1972, only the Drifters remained, with very few members. Now, for unknown reasons, the Pagans had their eyes set on absorbing the members of the Drifters into their organization. In particular, were 4 men who previously were with other disbanded clubs and were now believed to be with the Drifters. The year before, some of the Vulcan members visited New York City, where they encountered a group of the widely known Hells Angels. The members of the Vulcans were violently attacked and beaten. Now, this caused the members of the Vulcans, now some of whom had previously been drifters, to seek protection by joining the pagans. The Drifters, being a newer club, had a couple different minor encounters with the pagans, and it's important to understand that the two groups were not at war. This wasn't two groups that hated each other. In fact, the pagans were actually looking at this as a membership drive. They wanted the Drifters to disband and be absorbed into the membership of their club. Now, this membership drive finally came to a head on Saturday, February 5th, 1972. The past leader of the Delaware chapters of the Pagan was Boyd D. Curly Lewis. Curly had actually been a high-ranking official of the Drifters the year before. He was instrumental in trying to force the Drifters to disband and join up with the Pagan. Now, on the morning of February 5th, Curly contacted some members of the Pagans from Pennsylvania, and he put a plan into play to force the Drifters to join his current club. He directed a few members to grab up a member of the Drifters and hold on to him until he either gave up his colors or joined the Pagans. Now, while they were doing this, Curly, along with an estimated 9 other Pagans, headed to the home of John Bustard and Kara Reds Miller, who lived side by side in a duplex on Old Capitol Trail in Marshallton, intending to force them to join or give up riding altogether. It was believed that both John Bustard and Reds Miller were former or current members of the Drifters. It was around 4:45 p.m. when 2 cars loaded with a total of 10 men arrived at Bustard's home. When they arrived, neither men were home. First, they went to Miller's house at 3608 Old Capitol Trail, seen in this duplex to the right. And then they realized he wasn't there. However, his wife and baby were. As the 2 cowered upstairs, the men went next door to Buster's house on the left, where he lived with Donna Cole and her 5 children, aged 9 to 2. When they saw that he wasn't home either, the men started to break out the windows of the 2 men's homes and scrawled the words pagan and death on their front porch in pencil. Witnesses say they called the police when this was happening. However, the state police later denied that they were contacted. Bustard's girlfriend called him at his workplace and said what was happening. Bustard jumped in his car and headed straight home. Buster's girlfriend then called Reds Miller. Miller had just finished his rounds driving an oil delivery truck in Wilmington and was having a drink with a longtime friend, Vaughn Currender. She tracked him down at the Fairview Cafe located at Cedar and Marshall Streets in Browntown. She told Miller that the pagans were harassing her as well as his wife and baby. Miller, along with his friend, jumped into Miller's 1959 green Cadillac and drove as fast as they could to his Old Capitol Trail home. They pulled up, parked sideways in front of the duplex, jumped out of their car, and joined Bustard and some of his other friends who had already arrived. Now, when Miller arrived, he saw 10 men lined up on the hillside of the other side of Old Capitol Trail. In a scene right out of an old-fashioned Western shootout, 2 rival motorcycle clubs turned the suburban serenity into a furious midwinter gun battle. Now, here's the account of what happened as best as I can cobble it together. It has to be noted that the only people who would absolutely know what happened were the people who were there. As the 2 groups squared off, several men screamed at each other from across the road. Finally, Curly Lewis broke ranks and walked up to Miller. As hard as it is to understand, John Bustard, Curly Lewis, and Red Miller had been friends for a really long time. Curly walked right up to Reds Miller and said, "Hello, Reds." Lewis then pulled out a .38 caliber pistol, pointed it directly at Red's chest, and pulled the trigger. Miller took the slug to his chest and went down immediately. As soon as Miller went down, someone removed a .38 caliber automatic pistol from the wounded man's waistband and shot Miller again, this time in his leg. At this point, Miller passes out. About the same time as Miller passes out, John Bustard was shot in the thigh at close range. Next, Miller's friend, Von Currender, tried to hide behind a vehicle, and he was shot in the leg. Not realizing he had been shot, he ran as fast as he could behind Bustard and Miller's house. As the fierce gunfight raged on, people dodged behind cars and scrambled along the hillside for cover, all the while exchanging gunfire. As soon as the police arrived on the scene, some of the pagans drove off in their cars, while others climbed up the hillside and ran away into the woods between Marshallton and Cranston Heights. The police followed the men into the woods, and a manhunt ensued. The police were armed with shotguns, and canine officers were called in to help track the men down. The police said they got close to some of the men, but they were unable to catch them. However, they were able to find a large collection of weapons piled in the underbrush and recovered a revolver that was thrown into the Red Clay Creek. It's believed that these were the weapons that were abandoned by the gang members as they fled. Meanwhile, the injured were taken to a hospital by 4 local ambulances, and 2 cars remained outside of the house. One of the cars was left with the doors flung open and had a soggy black leather jacket draped over one door where a wounded pagan had left it. The old Cadillac was surrounded by pools of blood and had globs of blood dripping off its fender. The cars sat like fallen casualties, covered in blood and wounds from the massacre. Residents of Marshallton denied they saw anything but the backs of men fleeing the scene. Now, several of them expressed amazement that no passerbys were shot during the gun battle. Fear clutched the residents for days. Several neighborhood residents spoke anonymously to the state police about their investigation. "They're nothing but bums," one man said. "This used to be such a nice neighborhood," quoted a woman. "I hope they stay away from my house," exclaimed another woman. A neighbor said that the rented home of Bustard would sometimes be a scene of multiple bike gatherings, with the machines churning the dust and shattering the silence. One elderly man that was interviewed said, "I didn't see nothing. Don't you put my name in the paper or even say where I live." A young man stated that it looked like a movie outside with bodies and blood all over the place. When told several of the survivors were in critical condition, an unnamed woman told the papers, "I hope they all die." When the gunfight was over and the smoke had cleared, Curly Lewis lay dead. He was shot 11 times by 3 different types of ammunition: 22 caliber, 30 caliber, and shotgun pellets, with wounds to his face, chest, and abdomen. 3 suspected drifters, Miller, Currender, and Bustard, were injured, and one of the pagans, Lawrence Fisher, had been wounded. Fisher was in critical condition as he was shot in the chest. Reds Miller was also in critical condition due to gunshots to his chest and leg. John Bustard was in serious condition, having been shot in the right foot and left thigh. Now, after the gun battle, several weapons were found: a 22 caliber pistol, a 22 caliber rifle, a 12 gauge shotgun, and a bunch of undisclosed number of automatic pistols. Currender was treated at the hospital for his bullet wound and released. Bustard was released a few, both Miller and Fisher being treated in beds side by side to each other in the ICU. This alarmed both the hospital staff and the local police. Rumors were going around that some of the rival gangs might start trouble, but nothing happened. Commenting on the irony of the hospital's arrangements, a local man close to the motorcycle club members said, "First one up, the other's a dead man." Eventually, everyone recuperated from their wounds. Now, in the aftermath, police tried to get members of both groups to come in for questioning. 5 members of the pagans had warrants issued for their arrest on the charges, ranging from kidnapping to material witness. The police refused to release the name of those at large, explaining, "These guys go underground real fast. Once they find out we have warrants, we'll never find them." In questioning, Miller told the police that When I was shot in the chest, I collapsed to the ground, but I was still awake. He also told the police that he had, in fact, been carrying a legally registered handgun in his waistband, but he didn't bring it with the intent of using it against anyone. He explained he only has it when he's working as an oil delivery man in Wilmington, as it could be a dangerous job sometimes. He claimed that while he was laying there, one of the pagans took the gun from him and he was shot in the leg by his own weapon. At that point, Miller says he passed out and has no memory of anything else that happened. Miller denied being a member of the Drifters and said he only knew of 2 people left in the area who were members. Currender told the police that he was shot in the thigh as he ran towards a truck. He didn't realize he was shot until about 15 steps later. He then ran to the rear of Bustard's house and found something to bind his leg. He said he was behind the house for the rest of the shootout and hadn't witnessed anything else, but that Bustard was in front of the house and that he had a gun. He also said that he had never encountered any pagans before and that they only shot him because he was in Bustard's company. It was thought that Von Currender had actually been a member of the disbanded Vulcans. A suspected pagan, Kenneth Pugh of Elkton, Maryland, was charged as a material witness. Pugh admitted that he was a former pagan, but he said he left the group sometime before. Now, Pugh ran a gas station on South College Avenue in Newark, which was a suspected pagan hangout. He denied being involved in the actual shooting and hadn't seen who shot who. Gary Dunwell, 27, a suspected drifter from Bear, was arrested at the scene and charged with being an accomplice to first-degree murder of Lewis. He denied being a member of the Drifters and also didn't know who shot Lewis. The pagans hired a lawyer from Pennsylvania named John James Duffy Jr., who had worked with the pagans in the past. He said that they trusted him. And he started bringing in some of the members for questioning by the police and was present during the interrogations. Duffy was later arrested in Avondale, PA, for aggravated assault for pistol whipping a man in a local bar. He was actually eventually disbarred, only to be reinstated years later and hired by a very prestigious law firm in Philadelphia. Now, the police were told they would be permitted to question the men as long as it was in the presence of their lawyers. The police said they were hopeful that the statements from the men will clear up some of the cloudy spots that still surround the incident. The first suspected pagans brought to Troop 6 for questioning were Donald Gypsy Trott and James Jimmy K. Krasinski. They were both arrested on charges of being accessories after the fact of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and were arrested for being material witnesses. Next, a man from Lansdowne, PA, identified as Red Devil, was brought in for questioning. He was being interviewed as a witness and was not charged. He was later identified as Charles Red Devil Campbell. 2 other men were also interrogated as witness. They were James Tiny Tim Campbell and Robert Fat Cat Connell. Both were suspected members of the pagan. Now, here are the final charges that were filed over the course of the next year. James Krasinski, kidnapping, assault with intent to kill, misprision of a felony, which means not reporting a felony when you see one, and material witness. Donald Knott was charged with kidnapping, assault with intent to kill, misprision of a felony, and a material witness. Gary Dunwell was charged for being accessory of first-degree murder. Kenneth Pugh was charged for being a material witness. Robert Connell was charged for being a material witness. Charles Red Devil Campbell, assault with intent to kill. Lawrence Fisher, assault with intent to kill. Charges were filed against many people. However, no one would ever say who in the group actually fired a weapon other than that Curly Lewis did. After a year-long investigation, the state police determined that because Curly Lewis may have fired the first shot, Miller and his group of friends were actually defending Miller's property. So all charges against the suspected drifters were dropped. The state police also concluded that because none of the suspected drifters had actually identified any of the pagans other than Lewis as a shooter during the gunfight, and none of the suspected pagans gave any testimony as to who had fired a weapon during the shootout. All charges against the suspected pagans were also dropped. I'd just like to say, we're almost done here, Stacy. The account of this story comes entirely from newspaper accounts because, quite frankly, I don't think it would be possible to get anyone to actually talk about this. Now, there's a code of secrecy that most motorcycle clubs live by, and in this case, kind of worked out good as no one was ever convicted. So that's the end of the first talk. Stacy, do you want to go to questions?
Sure, yeah. And for the record, I was only asking so I wasn't in the middle of something. I'm working on the Green Bank gift shop right now, so I wanted to make sure I was paying attention.
That's okay.
But yeah, do you guys have any questions? I mean, the main comment we got is one of your friends thanking you for reminding them that this was going on.
Yeah. I was 5 years old when this happened. I was in kindergarten at Marshallton School, and I can remember on Monday I was in the afternoon half-day kindergarten, and I had heard all about it over the weekend. And I can remember sneaking up on the porch and seeing the bullet shots, and we were looking for it where it said pagans, and we couldn't find it. And we were looking for blood, and we couldn't find any of that.
That's awesome. I mean, all I had was like an abandoned random house that I had convinced myself that somebody was still living in when I was a kid. Like on the corner of because I lived in the middle of nowhere, past a gravel road before another gravel road. And there was this little house that was surrounded by trees, and in Manitoba, that's a pretty big deal. And it looked like it was built around the turn of the century or some such. And the windows were broken in, and we just convinced ourselves that there was like Dennis the Menace, where there was that evil older person that turned out to be okay. That lives.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
We convinced ourselves that that's who was living there, but we never actually got the courage to go in until I was 20.
Okay, well, if there's no questions, I'm going to go right into my second one, so we're not here until August.
That sounds great. Well, on to the next story, guys, and don't forget to leave your questions, or whether or not you have questions about the local history area or about Ray's stories in general. He's a plethora of information. So back to you.
Something. Okay, take two. Our community owes a huge debt of gratitude to the men and women of the volunteer fire service. They spend the time away from their loved ones and risk their lives to serve our community. This presentation is dedicated to those individuals. Now, this story focuses on a single fire call, one incident that happened during the 100-year history of Cranston Heights Fire Company. And to really put it into context, you need to have an understanding of the 19th century life in the Red Clay Valley. Now, life was simple back then, maybe even idyllic in some ways. But most of what we know to be common in everyday life had not yet been invented. Communities outside of Wilmington were rural and isolated. The Red Clay Valley consisted mostly of farming communities with small industries relying on the water power to drive the various mills. The growing workforce living in small tenant houses clustered around these mills slowly became communities. Are we okay on the slides?
Yeah.
Oh, we got to hold on for a second. We have an issue, a tech issue. Figure it out, Tommy. Anyway, so we have a slight technical issue here with the slide presentation. We'll get that fixed out. As always, a special thank you goes out to Thomas Gears, my partner in crime. Me and him we have the WilmingtonMemories.com blog where you can read a lot of our stories that we have told over the years. Almost Forgotten History, WilmingtonMemories.com, right there. And Tom and I have been doing the Almost Forgotten Histories of the Red Clay Valley series for 6 years now. Our last one was last February, and we were going to do one in March, but that unfortunately got canceled. So we're just waiting for it to come around on the guitar here is what we're doing.
All right, you're ready.
All right, okay, so we're going to go with the growing workforce living in the small tenant houses. Is that where we are?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The growing workforce living in the small tenant houses clustered around the mills slowly became communities. Schools, stores, and churches were built nearby to serve the expanding populations. Marshallton, Greenbank, Wooddale, and York Lynn, they're all examples of these industrial hamlets. One such village was Falkland, where C.J. Fellin Brothers operated what was one of the most extensive spice mills in the country. At 4 o'clock in the morning on September 9th, 1867, the citizens of the village were awakened to find flames bursting through the roof and the entire building wrapped in flames. Local residents realized there was no saving the mill and focused on preventing the fire from spreading to structures nearby. The fire raged on for 2 days before it ran out of fuel. The newspapers credit the work of the citizens and a row of fine large linden trees that prevented the fire from spreading. The mill was rebuilt, completely burned again in 1874, was rebuilt again, and burned a final time in 1878. 4 generations of the Fell family operated mills for over a century without a major fire. Then they had suffered 3 total losses in 11 years, and unfortunately were soon out of business for good. 28 years later, John Connell, a night watchman at Brandywine Springs Amusement Park, discovered a fire at 3 o'clock in the morning on August 17, 1905. He rang the bell in the park, alerting residents. Park manager N. Duchesne Cloward attempted to telephone the fire companies in Wilmington for assistance, but the phone was not working. He sent his 14-year-old son, William, by bicycle to the Newcastle County Workhouse to summon the Phoenix and Waterwitch fire companies from Wilmington. The firemen made it as far as Greenbank when their horses gave out. They secured fresh horses from the workhouse and made it to the park by daybreak, a full 4 hours after the fire was first discovered. Locals have been working a bucket brigade throughout the night. With help of the firefighters from Wilmington, the fire was under control by 9 a.m. The Egyptian Maze, Pete Seala's restaurant, and several smaller buildings were destroyed, and the scenic railway was badly damaged. Major fires struck Brandywine Springs again in 1907, 1911, 1914, and 1916. House fires were also all too common. The fire hazards were everywhere in the home of the time. Candles or kerosene lamps were used for light, and fireplaces and coal stoves were used for heat. Gasoline stoves were becoming popular in the kitchen, and electricity was in its infancy. The residents of Cranston Heights were all too aware of the dangers of fire in their rural area. It was clear that fire protection was desperately needed. Communication was unreliable, and fire response was difficult, even in good conditions. For these reasons, 5 local men, George Fountain, James Greenwood, Robert Crows, George McConnell, and Wilmington Fire Chief William J. Lutz got together on November 16th, 1919, and started planning for a local fire company. George Fountain was a local florist who served as the first president of Cranston Heights Fire Company, but he left after a few years amidst allegations of financial mismanagement. An interesting side note is Fountain's grandfather was Captain James Fountain, abolitionist and conductor on the Underground Railroad. Fellow conductor William Still recounted a story involving the narrow escape of 21 fugitive slaves aboard Captain Fountain's ship in 1855. Now, it seemed Fountain frequently secreted slaves to the north from southern ports, where he traded wheat, grains, and other items. One day, word got around Norfolk that a boat was harboring fugitive slaves. Norfolk's mayor and a posse boarded the ship, and after an amateurish but destructive search, the men departed, leaving the good captain and his stowaway cargo in place. James Fountain died in October 1878 when his schooner sank in a squall in the Delaware River. Robert Crows, due to his knowledge and experience in the fire service as a former volunteer firefighter with the Washington Fire Company in Wilmington, served as the first chief. He held that position until his death in 1944. Crows was also involved in the Delaware Volunteer Firefighters Association and served as its president in 1929. Their Ladies Auxiliary, the first outside the city of Wilmington, was formed on January 20th, 1920, and Cranston Heights Fire Company was officially incorporated on January 31st of that year. 1 month later, on February 20th and 21st, the Ladies Auxiliary held their first bazaar to raise money for the fledgling fire company. The fundraising brought in just enough money that on April 19th, 1920, the Evening Journal reported the company had ordered its first fire truck. The truck was manufactured in Wilmington by the United States Fire Apparatus Company. It was equipped with two 35-gallon chemical tanks with hose reel and ladders mounted on a 1-ton Ford chassis. The brand new fire truck was exhibited on the front lawn of Chief Crow's home on Monday, July 5th, 1920. The local papers gave much credit to the Ladies Auxiliary in helping raise the funds to purchase the truck. The truck was initially housed in Crow's barn. The first reported fire that Cranston Heights responded to occurred on September 4th, 1920 at 10:30 p.m. It was reported that there was a fire at a bungalow on Clayton Avenue owned by William Fanning. Unfortunately, the house had already been on fire for an hour before it was reported to the company. By the time the chemical truck arrived, there was nothing the firefighters could do but watch it burn to the ground. They used 4 tanks of chemicals, making sure the fire didn't spread to the neighboring houses. By March of 1922, it was evident that the fire company was getting good at their job. Within a 2-week period, Cranston Heights was credited with extinguishing 4 different fires, each having the potential to becoming total losses. One was at the Hollingsworth Lumberyard on the Lincoln Highway. The second was a house fire where the roof was set ablaze by a paper hanger burning old wallpaper in the fireplace. The ashes set the roof afire, and Cranston Heights came quickly and extinguished the flames, saving the house. The next was a house fire due to faulty electrical wiring. The last was at Brandywine Springs Park. A grass fire was reported between the swings and the carousel. When the chemical truck arrived, both the swings and the carousel were ablaze. They quickly extinguished both structures with minimal damage. By comparison of how fire ravaged the park in the past, it was now evident that having a local fire company that could quickly respond was absolutely worthwhile. In June of 1922, a bell tower was erected directly behind the firehouse. It was located at the rear of George Fountain's house. His wife would often be the one to ring the bell. It was actually an old railroad bell from a steam locomotive and can still be seen in front of the present-day Cranston Heights Fire Company. Now, at some point, most likely by World War II, the bell was replaced with an electrical siren. In 1957, the tower was removed and the siren relocated to the new firehouse on Kirkwood Highway. Now, during the tower's demolition, this document of Cranston Heights Fire Company letterhead was found inside the brass finial ball on top of the siren. On it was written the name of the fire company's 38 members, dated June 1922. Now, it became apparent that they were going to need a second truck. On August 21st of 1922, the officers launched a dollar drive fundraiser to purchase a new truck, and fundraising began in earnest. In April of 23, members of Cranston Heights Fire Company became aware that a pumper manufactured by the United States Fire Apparatus Company was going to be auctioned off by the sheriff in Wilmington. Apparently, another fire company had ordered the truck, but the deal fell through. A committee was formed to purchase the pumper. They initially set a bid limit at $4,500. After further consideration, they came to the conclusion that they need to raise some more funds to outfit the truck, and a motion was passed to raise $6,000 for the new vehicle. On June 7th, 1923, the truck went to the sheriff's auction block, and Cranston Heights Fire Company was the successful bidder. On July 2nd, 1923, a check was drawn for the amount of $3,154.50, payable to Sheriff John W. Walls, completing the transaction. 1,500 feet of new hose was ordered, and the Wilmington Fire Department initially lent them 500 feet of hose while they waited for the hose to be delivered. It was agreed that the pumper would carry a crew of 8 men and that the chemical truck would only carry 6. On July 30th, 1923, the pumper went on its first run. During a fierce thunderstorm, a barn owned by E.I. DuPont and leased by Isaac Elliott, located at Rock Manor, was struck by lightning and set ablaze. The Wilmington Fire Company and 5 Point Fire Companies were both called to the scene. By the time Cranston Heights Fire Company arrived, the barn was already too far gone to be saved. The new pumper was called on to assist in pumping water from the nearby reservoir to make sure the fire didn't spread to an adjacent home and other buildings. It was reported in the newspaper that, as was the custom at the time, Five Points Fire Company christened the new pumper, which would have consisted of the new fire truck being completely deluged by water from the other fire trucks that were there. Finally, on August 18th, the pumper was put through its paces. Around 2 a.m., a wheat stack next to a barn on Samuel E. Cooper's farm near Newport Gap Pike and Milltown Road was discovered to be on fire. Tenant farmer Clarence Brown and local residents started clearing all the livestock out and called Cranston Heights Fire Company. By the time the company arrived, the fire had spread to 5 wheat stacks and the barn was completely involved. Finding a water source nearby proved impossible, so they had to go back to the firehouse, get 1,000 more feet of hose so they could draft water from a nearby stream. Between 1,500 and 2,000 feet of hose were eventually laid. 5 Points and Ellesmere Fire Company were summoned, but they didn't go into service. For 7.5 hours, Cranston Heights managed to keep the fire contained to the barn and not let it spread to the nearby houses and sheds. The pumper remained in service until April of 24, when it was discovered the pump was damaged. The 2 rear bearings were faulty and the impellers were worn down. Not getting any satisfaction from the United States Apparatus Company, they decided to fix the problem themselves. The pump failed again within a year, and the front springs needed to be replaced as well. In August of 1925, the entire pump was sent out to be replaced. They also decided to have both trucks painted in the newly adapted color scheme of white and blue. Finally, both trucks were back in service by October 1925. In November, it was reported that the new pump was working satisfactorily. We're not going to have an intermission. So, Friday, January 15, 1926, was a cold day in Wilmington with a low in the teens. Snow and ice were abandoned and the roads were treacherous. In Cranston Heights, 48-year-old James Greenwood was in the cellar of his home at Newport Gap Pike banking off the fire for the night. His daughter, Ethel, and her husband, 21-year-old Alfred Ogden, were upstairs with their 5-month-old daughter, Elizabeth. Nearby, 23-year-old Leonard Hook and his 21-year-old brother, David, were at their mother's home at 1805 Marshall Avenue in Cranston Heights getting ready for bed. Another set of brothers, 18-year-old Edward Ainsworth Jr. and 23-year-old Thomas Ainsworth, also living in Cranston Heights, were turning in for the night. The 2 brothers had recently moved out of their father's home at 2410 Newport Gap Pike in the Cedars. They had both joined the company in October of 25. At 10:25 p.m., a call came into Cranston Heights Fire Company notifying them that a chimney fire at the home of Earl Allison on Milltown Road was the 220th call that came in the firehouse since its inception. Excuse me. Mrs. Fountain ran outside and started ringing the bell to summon the volunteers, and the men rushed to the firehouse. The first engine to leave the firehouse was the chemical truck. The men who were already at the firehouse when the call came in climbed on and drove off towards the fire. 42-year-old Walter Peters was driving, and Walter Gregg was the engineer. The next truck to leave was the recently repaired pumper. On board the pumper was Leroy Hill, age 28, in the driver's seat, with 44-year-old Chief Robert Crowe sitting behind him. Riding on the back platform was Leonard Hook, James Greenwood, and James King. Assistant Chief Earl Sayers was riding on the runner board next to Chief Crowe's. Riding on the runner board next to the driver were brothers Edward and Thomas Ainsworth. Lastly, riding in the hose bed on top of the 1,000 feet of hose were David Hook and Alfred Ogden. This was 2 more men than the pumper was supposed to carry. James Greenwood reportedly told his son-in-law, Alfred Ogden, it was too dangerous to be riding on the hose bed. Ogden, who had only joined the fire company the previous April, responded, "You ride where you want, I'll ride where I want to." This would be the last thing the 2 men would ever say to each other. The 10-man crew aboard the big white pumper set out from the firehouse on Seminole Avenue. Firefighter Clarence M. Jones also heard the bell ringing at his nearby home. He put on his boots and coats, then rushed to the firehouse. As he approached the firehouse, the iconic white pumper roared down the road with rubber-coated men clinging to the sides, with 2 additional men atop the hoses in the back. Jones jumped into the car of Glenwood Sturgis, who also missed the trucks, and they set out following the pumper to the fire. The pumper barreled down Seminole Avenue, making a left turn on Newport Gap Pike. It came to the next intersection where the Lang and Sturgis store was on the right, where it turned right onto the Lincoln Highway. Next, it rolled by the Hollingsworth Lumber Company along the Lincoln Highway, now Old Capitol Trail. The pumper picked up some speed and caught up to the chemical truck. Somewhere near the B&O station, driver Leroy Hill decided to pass the slower-moving chemical truck. The chemical truck and Sturgis's car were following closely behind the pumper as they descended into Marshallton. Next, they came to the sharp turn nicknamed Death Bend. As Hill turned right at Ford's store, the rear wheels began to slide. The 900-pound truck careened out of control. Thomas Ainsworth called out to the other men on the truck, fearing that it was going to run over as he grabbed onto the handrail. The men in the chemical truck, Clarence Jones and Glenwood Sturgis, saw the tragedy unfold from this point of view. The truck slid into some bushes and came to a rest on its side, leaning against a tree. The three men on the back platform locked arms and jumped off. Greenwood rode it out and was flung off as the machine tumbled. Like Greenwood, others were thrown to the ground. Jones described the scene as the ground and men being covered in blood. Some were slowly getting up while others were motionless on the icy ground. David Hook, Edward Ainsworth, and Alfred Ogden were buried under 1,000 feet of fire hose. The uninjured men at the scene pushed the truck off the heavy truck, pushed the truck off the tree and back onto its wheels, then began to remove the heavy hose off the three young men. Within minutes, the hose was lifted from atop the three young men, and first aid was being administered. The injured firefighters were brought into the home of William and Sarah Temple. Anna Mae Hendricks, the granddaughter of the Temples, later told people that there were bloodstains on the floor of the house for decades. Dr. William Fenimore, the fire company surgeon, was summoned to the house. Not wanting to wait for the doctor, they decided to rush the most severely injured victims to the hospital. A call went out to anyone who had a car in Marshallton. They were pressed into service to act as ambulances to transport the men with the worst injuries to the hospital in Wilmington. Alfred Ogden was placed into the car owned by Glenwood Sturgis and rushed to Delaware Hospital. Edward Ainsworth was placed into a touring car that started out for Homeopathic Hospital. His brother Thomas, who had injured his leg in the rollover, was hanging on the outside of the car, standing on the running board, waving traffic out of the way. At 6th and Union Street, the car collided with a trolley, but continued to the hospital. Thomas Ainsworth had come so close to the trolley that his rubber coat was actually cut from the collision, but he and the driver of the car were both unhurt. Edward Ainsworth died shortly after they reached the Homeopathic Hospital, as his skull had been fractured. David Hook was taken in a third car to Delaware Hospital, only to die from his injuries on the operating table later that night. Hook had just joined the fire company 10 weeks prior, on November 2nd, 1925. Ethel Ogden, along with her mother and daughter, went to the hospital that night to be with her injured husband, Alfred, and father, James Greenwood. As Alfred lay dying, a burglar entered their house and stole, among other things, a gold necklace Alfred had given to her and all the baby's diapers. Alfred Ogden never regained consciousness and died at the hospital the next morning of internal injuries and a fractured skull. The rest of the men suffered from various lacerations, sprains, fractures, and shock, but there were no life-threatening injuries. Of the three fallen heroes, only Ogden was married. Just an hour before the accident, Ogden was at the firehouse signing the papers and making the $3 initial payment on a life insurance policy. He reportedly said that he was not ready to die. The tragedy was the second for the Hook family, as Ernest Hook, the father of the 8 Hook children, had died 2 years earlier in 1924 when he fell from the roof of Newark High School as it was being constructed. Ainsworth was buried at White Clay Creek Cemetery, Ogden at Silverbrook Cemetery, and Hook at St. Barnabas Cemetery in Marshallton. The impact of such a devastating accident on a small rural fire company could have led to its disbandment. The pumper had been purchased the previous year and was not insured, and the fire company did not yet offer any kind of insurance for its members. Thankfully, the community came together and started several different fundraisers to help save the company. A fund was set up to repair the pumper, and another was set up to aid the families of the fallen firefighters, as well as the men who were injured. The Ladies' Auxiliary started raising money by holding various events. Hundreds of local people and companies gave what they could, ranging from just $1 to hundreds of dollars. Local fire companies, churches, and social organizations also made donations. By February 2nd, the fund for the fallen and injured men had reached $1,595. This amount did not include the proceeds from a very special fundraiser that was held on Thursday, January 28th at the Playhouse Theater in Wilmington. World-famous magician Harry Blackstone was performing at the Playhouse all week at the end of January. The manager of the Playhouse, Earl G. Finney, arranged with Blackstone to add a matinee performance for the benefit of the fallen men. Not only did Harry Blackstone agree to donate his services, but the entire staff of the show did as well. Blackstone's assistants, the orchestra, the stage crews, ushers, and everybody involved in the production. Tickets were sold for $1 each. Wilmington City Fire Company sold 800 tickets, and Cranston Heights Fire Company sold an additional 400. It was reported that at one point during the coroner's inquest, tickets for the show were sold to its members. As the show got underway, Harry Blackstone was made an honorary member of Cranston Heights Fire Company. He was presented with a certificate as well as a badge and uniform. Blackstone thanked the members and expressed that it was a privilege and honor to assist them in their hour of need. During the show, Blackstone added a local touch to one trick. While wearing his fire uniform, he appeared in the closet of Mrs. Cranston Heights. Playhouse manager Earl Finney was also given an honorary membership for his help. The performance added $1,200 to the fund to help the families of the fallen and injured men. During the coroner's inquest, it was determined that several different factors were responsible for the tragedy. First, the snow had melted during the day. Its runoff pooled on the road, then froze again, making the curve particularly dangerous. Also, the truck was not fitted with skid chains. The next day, it was reported that the intersection was a sheet of ice and several cars skidded off the road at that very spot. The men following the truck also reported that the rear passenger side wheel of the truck struck the curb and the resulting jolt started the slide. The driver felt the skid and raced the engine, attempting to power through it. And lastly, the wooden spokes of the rear driver's side wheel broke from the force of the slide and started the rollover. The coroner's inquest absolved the driver of the doomed truck, Leroy Hill, from blame from the wreck. By March 29, 1926, the fire company had nearly $3,500 on hand for the benefit of the dead and injured and started dispensing the funds. Leroy Hill, Robert Crows, James Greenwood, Leonard Hook were all unable to work because of various injuries and were all paid $15 per week for 7 weeks and $200 per week for 5 weeks to compensate for lost wages. Both Earl Sayers and Thomas Ainsworth were injured but refused compensation. James King, who had ligaments in his left leg injured, was also paid the same amount but returned to work that week and stopped receiving relief. The newspaper reported Alfred Ogden's widow was given a check for $500. They noted she was giving that amount because she had a 7-month-old baby and that she gratefully accepted the check. They also reported that David Hook's mother was given a check for $300 and was never told that she never told the committee that she was other than satisfied. Edward Ainsworth Sr. was also given a check for $300, which he refused in protest. He was told that the check was for that amount because Edward Jr., who was 18 at the time, no longer lived at home and did not contribute to the family support in any way. Everyone was told that the checks were only a first payment, and there was still a little over $1,000 left in the fund. The committee felt that the injured men needed support as they were unable to work, and explained that while Hill was in the hospital, his wife had the grip and his child had the measles. They further explained that when all the injured men were back to work, the rest of the remaining funds would be distributed among the family of the men who died. Edward Ainsworth Sr. was not satisfied and made a public complaint that the funds were being misused. He told the committee he thought his son should have been offered the $1,000 compensation for his son's death, or roughly 1/3 of all the money raised. He felt that the funds should only be distributed to the families of the men who died. He also made several accusations about the misuse of the disbursements of the funds raised by the committee, including that funds were being diverted to repair the truck. The Relief Committee refuted each one of his many accusations in the newspaper one by one. Even with each one of his accusations being refuted, Ainsworth Sr. was not satisfied and published a letter to the editor of the Evening Journal on April 2nd, 1926. He expressed his displeasure with the firehouse and how they distributed the funds, and stated that his son was entitled to the same protection of $1,000 insurance that they had just placed on all the other members of the firehouse in response to the accident. He went on to state that his son, who had just joined in October, was taken as a member without his consent, then brought him back to us to do with him as we saw fit. The firehouse made changes in response to the tragedy. In addition to life insurance being taken out on all active members, they changed the Constitution to require potential members under the age of 21 to get parental permission to join. There was a motion that was made to require the fire truck responding to a call make a full stop before making the turn at the scene of the accident in the future. This motion failed. However, in 1931, a bridge was put across the Red Clay Creek, removing the hazard of Death Bend. Thomas Ainsworth remained an active member. He responded to the very next call on January 23rd and went on over half of the next 24 calls. He also served as secretary of the company for the next 2 years. Eventually, his employment required him to move out of the district, so he left the fire department. Thomas Ainsworth Jr., now 88, said his father never really talked about the accident except to say where it happened. Other descendants of the family were contacted, had never even heard of the accident. Edward Ainsworth Sr.'s belief that neither of the boys should have been on the truck in the first place could explain why the story wasn't told. David Hook's brother, Leonard H. Hook, also stayed an active member for a few years. Years later, David Hook's nephew, Robert Hook, was instrumental in restoring the 1931 American LaFrance fire truck owned by Cranston Heights today. Members of the Hook family that have been contacted view his death as a tragic accident. The Ogden family stayed close to Alfred Ogden's daughter, Elizabeth. In fact, Alfred Ogden's nephew, Billy Ogden, joined the fire company later and was friends with Elizabeth, her daughter Janice, and all of Elizabeth's half-brothers and sisters. Ethel Greenwood, the widow of Alfred Ogden, was an active member of the Ladies' Auxiliary her whole life, as was her daughter Elizabeth. Ethel Greenwood Ogden remarried a few years later to Earl Temple Harrington. He was actually a pallbearer at her husband's funeral. He joined the firehouse in 1927. They had 5 children, one who died as an infant. Their 3 sons all went on to be active life members of Cranston Heights Fire Company. Their oldest son, James Harrington, the namesake of James Greenwood, was a life member. Their next son, Raymond M. Harrington, made fire service his life, as well as being a life member of Cranston Heights for almost 60 years. He went on to be a City of Wilmington firefighter, a lifetime instructor at Delaware State Fire School, and a deputy state fire marshal. 2 of his sons, Leonard T. Harrington and myself, Raymond J. Harrington, are currently life members of Cranston Heights. His son, Raymond J. Harrington, is one of the authors of this presentation. Ethel's youngest son, Harold Harrington, is currently a life member of Cranston Heights and is the only direct descendant of anyone who lost a family member to this horrible accident still involved at the firehouse. This concludes our talk. We hope you learned a few things. We're going to stop here now. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. If not, that's fine too.
Thank you so much, Ray. I really appreciate that. I think everybody else did too.
Let's hope. Anybody complain?
No, so that's good. Doesn't seem like we've got
questions. That's okay.
Questions.
Just
but
obviously, Ethel Ogden was Ethel Harrington is my grandmother. So my grandmother's first husband was Alfred Ogden, who was killed on the fire truck. So, I've got a very strong family connection to Cranston Heights. Plus, I'm a life member there, and I love it. I love it so much. There's some great members there.
If you know Ray, you know that he loves the Cranston Heights Fire Department.
Yeah. On a side note, on my first story, the Jamie Fisher, the pagan who was shot in the chest, that's my mom's cousin.
Oh, wow.
It's Delaware. We're all related.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we pulled it right in at 8:00. I'm pretty happy.
Despite you were on time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm answering some stuff. Were any of the pagans on the first story known to have lived in Newark?
There was Pew ran a gas station in Newark, and I think he lived there as well. Oh no, Pew lived in Elk and worked in Newark. Yeah, but none that I saw. None of the people who I read about or researched about lived in Newark.
That's fair. What was the intersection of the accident? The picture went by too quickly for them to recognize it.
Oh, it's the Old Capitol Trail and what's it? Newport Road?
Newport Road.
Yeah, Newport Road. It's if you're an old person, it's right across from the Three Stars Pizza shop that hasn't been there in 20 years. But there's a smoke shop, I think a vape shop on the one corner, and back of it's the old Marshallton School.
Yeah, I know.
Building.
And I'm new here.
Yeah, and you make that turn on the new road, and it goes to either Duncan Road, or you can make a right. It'll go up Greenbank Road. Here, Tommy's got a picture of it if you can see that.
Let's spotlight that so people can have a better idea.
Yeah, and this picture is nice because you can see how the road turned to the right sharply, and then you see the newly paved road where Ford's gas station and grocery store was.
On the bridge is pretty iconic too. It's one of the more unique ones in the area.
Yep.
Jim says, you're getting a lot of thanks. St. Catherine of Siena held some of their first masses at Cranston Heights Fire Department.
That was my mother's father, my grandfather's parish, St. Catherine's. It's Delaware. We're all cousins.
There we go, right? It's one of the first things that I learned when I moved here. I will apologize. Allie had a squirrel emergency. They've made their way into her attic. So, homeowners got a homeown. Got to get that out before there's problems.
They made their way into the attic.
That's
so funny. Just real quick to everybody, I started volunteering with the Wilmington and Western when I was 11. At that point, the Greenbank Mill was a burnt out shell. And I can remember being down there when they first started trying to renovate it and rebuild it. There were a couple different groups who were doing it. I actually got in through some drywall in upstairs in the apartments when they first started rebuilding it back in the early 80s. I volunteered there for quite a few years through the 1990s, and the people running it now are just amazing. They're doing so good work with the funds that they have. They've been really instrumental in getting some grants to make big repairs to the buildings, the new roofs, plus the livestock that they're keeping. I know it's a tough time for everybody right now, but if you ever felt like making a donation to a small nonprofit, this is one that has a lot of heart. It has wonderful people, and they are just making it happen down there. So if you feel like donating at some point, please do. If you feel like coming down and volunteering, I'm sure they'd love to have you. It's a very inclusive group.
Thank you. And
there's my plug, but I mean,
that's a pretty honest plug because I didn't ask him to do that at all.
No, it's from the heart. I love what you guys are doing. I love being able to help, and I love that you gave us a forum to be able to share these kind of stories with the community. What are the stories if I can't share them?
Well, yeah. And I mean, local history really should just be a partnership. It shouldn't be proprietary or anything like that. No. Like I see that, and when you tell me that you want to take stories down, I understand because if they're
these, I'm actually going to turn both of these probably into documentaries.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fair. We have a few people that want to share it with their brothers, I let them know that we will leave it up
Yeah,
for a while.
if you're still watching this, looks like there's still like 30 people here. Greenbank Mill Associates is going to leave this up on their Facebook page for a couple of days, and then they're going to take it off again because I really do want to make documentaries out of this, like I did the Lost Motion Pictures of Brandywine Springs. Just it gives me other options. And so if you're any of your friends or anyone you know wants to see it, now's the time. Otherwise, contact me. I'll come to your house and I'll just tell you the story. I'm not doing anything else. Anyway.
Socially distanced, of course, right? So I've got to advocate for proper things.
Have my mask. I got COVID tested today. I'm negative, so.
I've been the safest person. I don't know how. I think I've been out like 5 times in 7 months.
So anyway, thank you again. I guess that's 8 o'clock. There's no other questions.
That's 8 o'clock, and
it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Join us on December 11th for our next Folklore Friday. For those of you that are interested in more of the historic trades kind of thing, we do have a presentation next week on Thursday after the election. So, once that high comes, we've got we've got a local or an author and professor that's going to be doing that. So head over to our Facebook page, events, to sign up for that. It is free. It will be done over Zoom, however, so a little bit of a different forum.
And lastly, as always, my cohort in crime, Thomas Gears.
Oh yeah, thank you, Tommy,
instrumental in all of our. We do so many histories together. We've been doing research together for forever. And without Tommy, there's no talks. And without me, Tommy doesn't have any talks. So
teamwork makes the dream work.
We're a great team. We really are a great team. So.
And we're very thankful that you guys both participated so much with this. Thank you for letting me strong arm you into doing this.
Thanks for forcing me.
Doing that. And we're happy to, provide another forum for you. We've got this. We're happy to do it.
Well. So, hopefully I'll see you in person again ever.
Gosh, I hope so.
That'd be so nice.
Pandemic needs to end.
All right, we're done here. Take care.
All right, thanks, guys. Happy Halloween.
Bye.